Hello everyone, welcome back to my Form 5 ethics class. Today we're going to finish looking at the Respondeo in question 6, article 1 on what do we mean by voluntary. Let's get to it. Here's our Porphyrian tree from the last video, summarizing the first part of the Respondeo. We were looking at principles of motion, or where motions or changes begin, and the first distinction is between those principles of motion that are found inside of the thing moving or changing, and those that are not, those that are found outside. But then further, when we look at those intrinsic principles of motion, we find that some things are moving themselves, but most things are not. Most things are not self-movers. And we're trying to figure out what the difference between them is. And that's what the rest of the Respondeo is about. It has something to do with motion toward an end or for an end. But that by itself is a little too vague to be helpful. So let's go take a look at what Aquinas does here. Here's the text of the Respondeo, taking us all the way to the end of the response in the article. And you can see about halfway down on the left there, I've got the ellipsis inside the square brackets, marking out where I removed the scanning error, the extra clause that we don't want. On the right, we've got our essential questions for this section. The first one we've already said, what's the difference between something that moves itself and something that does not? Perhaps that will turn on a distinction. But also, we need to pay close attention to this word some. It shows up in a couple of these sentences. That some modifier turns out to be very important, much more important than it may first seem. And then finally, which is really our concluding question for the Respondeo, what is the twofold interiority of the voluntary act? And what do we mean by twofold interiority? We'll see how that goes when we get to the end. So here's the text up close. Obviously, I have formatted it quite a bit. I've broken it up into its individual sentences, and I have highlighted some of the transitions, try to make things a little bit clearer about what's going on. And this first sentence is sort of the big problem for us. Aquinas makes a pretty controversial claim, controversial for us at any rate, something very distinctive for his Aristotelian cosmology. In order for a thing to be done for an end, some knowledge of the end is necessary. And the some word there in Latin is a little bit interesting. It's actually aliqualis. It's a slightly strange word choice. It's probably better rendered as something like some kind of knowledge. Some kind of knowledge of the end is necessary. Let's see what those kinds are. Now, it's easy to misunderstand this claim. In order for a thing to be done, some knowledge of the end is necessary. It sounds like we might be saying that everything has knowledge of its end, and that's just as silly as what we were saying last week when we were worried about saying that rocks are self-movers. We don't mean the rock is moving itself, and we don't mean that the rock has knowledge of the end. Why does Aquinas think this? Because again, end here just means that the change comes to an end. There's a final state. There's some initial state, and as a result of change, we're in a new state. That new state is all we mean by end. So it just means that every change is, in part, defined by its final state. Well, so the rock has fallen to the ground, and I have walked across the room. The child has become an adult. The chemical reaction has come to an end. That doesn't really seem to tell us anything about knowledge or anything further about intrinsic principles of action. So why would that require knowledge of the end if everything works that way? For Aquinas, the end is playing a really important role in defining a change. It's a cause. It is a constitutive element of what we mean by a change. If there is no end, no change happened. Right? We have to end up in a new state. You might also see it in terms of the principle. Right? The end is the thing the principle is aiming at. They are correlative. So we're pointing at an outcome, or we're heading toward an outcome. which is defining the change, and which is in some way, it's a cause of some sort, in the Aristotelian sense of cause. Why is all of that a problem? Well, the end doesn't exist. That's why it's a problem. The end, as an end, doesn't exist yet. It's not real. It's going to exist. If it already existed, we wouldn't have a change. The principle and the end aren't found together in the same way. So how can it be this hugely important determinative principle of the change? How can it be causing things if it doesn't exist? This is why Aquinas says that there must be some knowledge of the end. It has to exist, if not as a substance, in re, then it has to exist as a being of reason. It has to exist in a mind, in the form of knowledge. Now, we could go very far down the rabbit hole looking at how this works. We're actually coming up against Aquinas' fifth way to demonstrate the existence of God by reason alone. He uses this exact idea for that argument, which we've never looked at in any of my classes. And I don't want to detain ourselves too long on this point. We can talk about it in class a little bit, but this is obviously a really big issue for the way his Aristotelian physics works. And it might be worth asking, and I'm going to ask my students to reflect on, what would happen if we skipped this? Would we still be able to get all of our same results if we didn't worry about this slightly exotic approach to principle and end, and the fact that the end must exist in knowledge in some way? So we can come back to those things in class. For now, let's just take it as a given that in order for a thing to be done for an end, some knowledge of the end is necessary. Well, now we need to look at the kinds of knowledge of the end, because we definitely don't want to say that rocks have knowledge of the end. That would be silly. So we get our first distinction here, or I guess it's our third distinction, the distinction that we're looking at in this close-up. On the one hand, which I've added to the text to make it a little clearer, whatever so acts or is moved by an intrinsic principle that it has some knowledge of the end, has within itself the principle of its act, so that it not only acts, but acts for an end. That's the sort of obvious sense of knowledge of the end. The thing that's moving has a knowledge of its own end, and that's part of how it's moving. On the other hand, if a thing has no knowledge of the end, even though it have an intrinsic principle of action or movement, nevertheless, the principle of acting or being moved for an end is not in that thing, but in something else, by which the principle of its action toward an end is imprinted on it, or maybe a little more closely with the Latin, impressed on it, imprimitur. So the knowledge of the end that's necessary for something to be done for an end can be found in one of two places, very much like our principles of motion can either be found inside the thing or outside of the thing. Now our knowledge of the end can be found inside of the thing that's moving, or outside of the thing that's moving. In the case of things that don't have knowledge of the end, that knowledge of the end is coming from without, and the end toward which it's acting is being impressed on it. The classic example here is the way the archer impresses an end on the arrow. The archer knows the end. The arrow does move for an end, and it reaches that end, hopefully, if the archer's any good and nothing gets in the way. But that end that the arrow is moving toward, the knowledge of that end isn't in the arrow. It's the end is impressed on it, on the arrow. So these things, we're flipping over to the right column here, such like things, the ones that have no knowledge of the end, they're not said to move themselves, but to be moved by others. And that's what's going on with the rock. The rock doesn't move itself. The rock doesn't have a knowledge of its end. There's no knowledge of an end arising in the rock, or in the electron, or in most things in the universe. They are moved by others. And how they are moved by others and by what chains of causality, that's physics, and that's all of the sciences as we know them, and we don't really care about that so much in this class. What we care about is the other one. Those things which have a knowledge of the end are said to move themselves, because there is in them a principle by which they not only act, but also act for an end. And this is what I meant by the twofold interiority on the previous page. Not only does the motion begin inside of the thing, but the knowledge of the end also comes from inside of the thing. So when we were first looking at voluntary and concerned with the action coming from within, what we're really looking for is an action that comes from within in more than one way. And this is that way. And so you get this concluding line: consequently, since both are from an intrinsic principle, namely that they act and that they act for an end, the movements of such things are said to be voluntary. For the word voluntary implies that their movements and acts are from their own inclination. We can flip back to the Porphyrian tree, and we can now describe a little bit more clearly what's going on at each level. At the first distinction, we're asking, where does the motion begin? And we're seeing the motion begins inside the thing moving or not. At the second level, now we want to know, where does the knowledge of the motion's end begin? Where's that coming from? Is the knowledge of the motion's end coming from within the self, coming from within, in which case it's a self-mover, or not, in which case it's not a self-mover? And that is the complete Respondeo. That's actually right there, that tiny little picture is really what their entire Respondeo is about. Now, we do still need to talk about the word some. Some knowledge of the end. That is a loaded term, and it actually gets us a lot of interesting ideas. When Aquinas says that there must be some knowledge of the end, he's raising the possibility of degrees. There are degrees of knowledge of the end. If you didn't put a modifier there at all, if you just said knowledge of the end, a self-mover must have knowledge of the end. Well, simply speaking, and without any qualification, only God has knowledge of the end without any limit. So everything has only some partial knowledge of its end. That would give us the interesting result that only God is a true self-mover. He knows himself as the end of everything. And as the only truly self-moving thing, he's the only truly free thing. That's a pretty nice result, actually. We could go on to say that because he's the only truly free thing, our freedom is somehow found in him. We'll use an idea like that later. But it also allows us to say a lot of things about humans. If knowledge of the end comes in degrees, then so does self-moving, so does voluntariness. To the degree that we have knowledge of our end, to that degree our action is voluntary. We can reverse it, we can negate that. To the degree that we lack knowledge of the end, or that knowledge of the end is impaired, we lack voluntariness. We are less of a self-mover in that regard. This idea is very important. We're going to use this in the next couple of weeks immediately and throughout the semester. That knowledge of the end becomes hugely important. What are the things that can limit it? What are the things that can destroy it? We're only interested, ethically speaking, in voluntary actions. So if you can take knowledge of the end out of the picture, you no longer have a voluntary action. And this is huge. But there is yet another implication to the some knowledge of the end business, and it's actually what Aquinas pivots to in the very next article. Knowledge comes in different forms. There's sensitive knowledge, possessed by all animals, and there's rational knowledge. Animals are self-movers. Aquinas uses them as the paradigm of self-motion when he's doing the first mover argument in Summa Contra Gentiles. So an animal is, to the degree that it has knowledge, it's voluntary. It's a self-mover. That means that we can see all of animals, including ourselves, as being on a spectrum, some sort of scale of self-moveriness, some sort of scale of voluntariness. There's a kind of voluntariness that is attached to sense knowledge, knowledge of particulars. And then there's a further kind of voluntariness, corresponding with this further kind of knowledge, rational. And that allows us to assemble this pretty interesting arrangement of different kinds of self-motion, different kinds of self-movers, different degrees of voluntariness. And this distinction between the way animals are voluntary and the way we are voluntary as humans will run throughout many of our later articles. We're going to skip the animal article, question 6, article 2. It's a little bit of a trap for us right now. but we're going to pick up all of the ideas of it down the road as we go through some later material. So that's what the sum gives us. Now, I told you when we were cleaning up the text of the Respondeo that we needed to come back to see these concluding sentences that I eliminated. And you can see them here. We've just covered them pretty well. We can say one or two parting shots on them. The penultimate sentence, hence it is that, according to the definitions of. This text is just summarizing what we said with the third distinction between self-movers and not self-movers, that it implies knowledge. But if you notice, what Aquinas is actually doing is directly addressing the way Objection 1 invoked those three authors. He's acknowledging here that those three authors do all, in fact, include the idea that knowledge is necessary for the voluntary. Objection 1 was only using the first part of their definition. And that is a nice segue into what we're going to look at in the reply to Objection 1. So that's a little bit of a setup. And then the final sentence, the concluding line of the Respondeo. Since man especially knows the end of his work and moves himself, in his acts especially is the voluntary to be found. I'm not a huge fan of especially as the English word there. It's okay. The Latin's maxime. Especially sounds like we're trying to say that it is somehow the mark of our species, which is in some sense true and worthwhile, but it's not really what Aquinas is saying. Aquinas is saying that man most knows the end of his work and most moves himself, maximally. Well, we have to be a little careful how we use that maxime, because strictly speaking, it's not true. We do not know the end of our work and move ourselves more than God does. We also don't know the end of our work and move ourselves more than angels do. Angels also are more voluntary than we are. So we have to take this as being relative to other animals, like we were just saying before. That's the only sense in which we're maximally voluntary. Compared to God and angels, we're barely free at all. We're the dumbest of all the rational creatures. We are the most limited of the rationals, at least as far as we know. But again, this is going to allow us to focus on human voluntariness. That's what ethics is about. But we're always going to want to keep an eye on the idea of animals. And this is going to show up in reply to Objection 2. So I'll say a little bit more when we get to that. And with that, the Respondeo is done. All that's left is to go on to the replies. And in this article, those replies are extremely important. We have not yet actually addressed the major problem that Objector 1 brought up, which is, okay, fine, it's a beautiful Respondeo. I like the Porphyrian tree. You used 3 distinctions. I'm blown away. Yada, yada. But objects still move us, right? So how is there an intrinsic principle of motion? We have to solve that. So we will look at that and all 3 replies in the next video. And until then, good luck studying. Stay safe. And if you've got any questions, let me know.